I'm Jeff Beer, and this is Brand New World from Fast Company. On today's episode, the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity, basically the ad industry's Oscars happening in mid-June, has named Apple its Creative Marketer of the Year. I called up one of my favorite industry strategists, Elizabeth Paul, to dig into the brand's polarizing year of advertising and where it ranks amongst Apple's most iconic brand work. Then, I've got an interview with Meta's head of global consumer marketing, Ashan Panadurai, to talk about The Seat, a feature documentary that dropped on Netflix last month about Mercedes Formula One team's search for a successor for racing legend Lewis Hamilton, and how WhatsApp was key to that entire story. All right, let's get started. Okay, before we get to my first conversation, I got a little housekeeping to do about the evolution of Brand New World. The first iteration of this pod was a very specific look at how AI is changing how brands and marketers work. Now, we're opening up the aperture, as they say, to talk more about brand culture more broadly. Of course, that will involve AI from time to time, but it's also to discuss sports, entertainment, music, comedy, and everywhere else brands squeeze their way into pop culture. Everyone says they hate advertising, but everyone loves at least one brand. Brand New World is here to talk about why. That means I'll be popping up in your feed once every month as part of the Fast Company Podcast Network. Okay, let's get on with the show. Joining me today is one of my favorite ad industry folks, Elizabeth Paul. Elizabeth is a strategist by trade and is the chief brand officer at award-winning ad shop, The Martin Agency. And you'll know their work from major brands like Geico, UPS, new Axe work with Pete Davidson, and much more. For those who don't know or are unfamiliar, the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity is part award show, part industry conference, and it's probably the biggest annual gathering of brands, marketers, entertainment folks, tech folks, and media on the planet. Anything and anyone that touches a brand, from social platforms to sports stars and celebrities, is here in the south of France. And this year, the Creative Marketer of the Year award has been given to Apple. Now, Apple is an iconic marketer, an all-time first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt. But 2024, in my opinion, has been a bit of a mixed bag. So why is this their year? That's what we're here to talk about. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Beyond all that good stuff about the major brands, you're also someone who's always up for some hot take banter about the work and the culture around ads and brands. So you are a perfect first guest to Brand New World. So I wanted to start with this idea that Apple has been named the Creative Marketer of the Year by the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity. It's probably the biggest annual gathering of like brands, marketers, entertainment folks, anyone in like the brand ecosystem on the planet. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, Cannes has done this really interesting thing in the last few years that, like, as a strategist, I both respect, and you see something great and you're like, oh, I wish I had thought of that. You know, there was a period of time where it was kind of just about celebrating creativity, or at least that was the reputation. So I would argue a lot of important business gets done that week, in addition to, doling out awards.
You're right. It does seem like it is like this, because it's this gathering, it's patting on the back, the awards. There's I'm not saying navel gazing, but certainly like thinking about broader issues, whether that's, I know last year comedy was a big part of the conversation. AI was, of course, a big part of the conversation. But to your point, like business gets done. There's a lot of people meeting and like stacking those meetings that get stuff done for the rest of the year.
That was really interesting. Like the era of like people going and just partying the whole week. I personally have never had that Cannes experience. Like my Cannes experience is usually like 21-hour days of client meetings and conversation, and which is not complaining.
Yeah. Well, speaking of like zooming out and that broad view, Creative Marketer of the Year. I mean, Cannes starts, it's the week of the 16th of June. They name it, whatever, maybe a month ahead of time. It's sort of like it's not a lifetime achievement, but it's kind of like how the Oscars do the lifetime achievement, where they're like, oh, we're giving this award. They don't name it at the show. It's like this celebration anyway. And of course, Apple's an iconic marketer. What did you think when you heard Apple's Creative Marketer of the Year for 2024?
Well, to reflect on it, Apple is arguably the marketer of the generation in some ways. If this was a Lifetime Achievement Award, who would deserve it, I think most people would probably say like Nike or Apple, or I mean, like
Yeah.
there's a handful. I would like to think that Geico would be in that conversation in terms of proving, kind of inventing direct TV and proving that you can do entertainment, et cetera. But when you think about like changing how marketing works, I don't know that any of that happens without Apple. Like without Apple, there is no Simon Sinek start with why. I don't know that you have a generation of purpose-driven marketers putting other tactics aside and being like, we have to emanate from our why. Yes, brands like Dove and so on and so forth, have contributed mightily to purpose-driven marketing. But I think Apple in so many ways represents a generational shift in marketing. So when I first heard they were marketer of the year, I was like, no one's ever going to be mad at you for picking Apple.
No one's fired for that.
Yeah. What was the whole like no one gets fired for hiring IBM?
Yeah.
Like, no one's gonna get booed for picking Apple. They're kind of like perennially great, generationally important. And at their best, Apple's advertising fuses technology and humanity. Obviously, their tech does as well. And I think their advertising has been an era of really showing what that looks like when tech can be a bicycle for the mind. And so the campaigns that have come out of that have all conveyed that Apple's products were made to like unlock and unleash human beings' capacity to create. And then in the spirit of like the medium being as powerful as the message, they have done that in a kaleidoscopic manner, of creative campaigns. And so that is part of their legacy. So my first thought was like, sure, Apple's always a good answer. But then when I kind of interrogated myself and was like, what about 2024 specifically? And I went and I looked at, kind of all the work of this year. On one hand, it wasn't a bad year. I mean, they won an Emmy this year. They've done some great work this year for sure. One thing that I noticed that, I've never worked on the brand. And so, this is a total outsider's view. But when I looked at things like Write Smarter, to some extent, even R.I.P. Leon, which is like a great film, they don't feel like it's about edifying the artist in all of us. It felt a little bit more like it was preparing us for the final act of WALL-E, where humans are ready to like...
We're getting fitted for our chairs.
Yeah, exactly. With our big gulps and like let technology push our doughy bodies to and fro. It's probably more accurate, but maybe less aspirational.
Yeah.
There were some things this year that like I can like them as individual executions, but I think they might have been missing some of the spark that has made Apple work great over time.
I totally agree with you, but I do like the idea that like when I thought about this year, I started to think about maybe this is a time where, I don't know how to put this. I was thinking about this in the sense of like, is Apple kind of like the Christopher Nolan of marketers, where I think of him as like filming on film and committed to the theatrical release and non-IP, at least, post Batman. But like Apple's kind of built its reputation on these big feeling, whether that's happy or emotional or whatever, but sort of embedding their product in that emotion in such an interesting way that they're continuing to try to do that, but it's kind of the same dynamic. Like I think it won a Clio recently. It won a bunch of stuff anyway. The Flock ad around privacy, where the security cameras are kind of birds. I know you put this in our notes. We were talking earlier about heartstrings, which I think we may differ on. I thought it was great in a way that's schmaltzy, but in a way that Apple's been, done really well in the past of like really making an emotional story about a product demo, essentially. That ad was basically like where the AirPods were used as hearing aids and they were enabled between a father and a daughter, I believe. So this year stood out there's a few good ads, but I feel like there was a few more in my mind that stuck out for a different reason, being polarizing and actually, maybe not their greatest work.
There were a few this year, and let me say a few things. Like one, when I looked at the work this year, one of the questions I asked myself, and I know we'll talk about this in a few minutes, is like, where does this live in the pantheon of my top five, of like the top five?
Right.
And like, is there anything this year that will dislodge something else from the top five, right? So that was one question. And that is like a little bit of the victim of your own success, being so good for so long that you are your own like high watermark. So one question was like, is there anything this year that would dislodge something else that I've loved for a long time? And I would say in that regard, the thing that got closest to me was Someday. I mean, like, beautifully done, really powerful. I don't know if it's dislodged anything from my top five, but I could seriously consider it, right? Another thing I think about with Apple is like, is this something only Apple can do? Because there's a lot of marketers out there. There's a lot of like tech and specs and tell a story around a feature function. But Apple has always done it in a way that, like, the tech feels like a category of one, even when they're not. I thought that Heartstrings, to me, what was actually probably the most powerful about that is knowing what that innovation will do in a world where like a lot of elderly people can't afford hearing aids and they're thousands of dollars. And like
Yeah.
them disrupting that space, I think is interesting. Did I think that was an ad that no one else could have done in the way that I think a lot of their best work? It's not that I didn't think it was nice, but it didn't feel as singular as their most iconic work to me. But it was lovely.
Fair enough. Now, Someday, maybe describe Someday. Was it directed by Spike Jonze?
Yeah, and Pedro Pascal, a emotional, creative phantasma. I've not seen the finishing rates, but I saw some data from Google Creative Labs the other day or a little while ago that showed that in the last like 2 years, completion rates on 2 to 3 minute films are higher advertising than 15s or 30s.
Oh, wow.
Which kind of goes against the wisdom that people don't have time and they won't pay attention. And the hypothesis was that if you're making something that's 2 or 3 minutes, it's not ad-like. You know you're creating a piece of entertainment. And if something is entertainment, people will watch it. And they will watch it all the way to the end if it's good, versus the story you can tell in 15 or 30 seconds feels very ad-like, and people hate ads, even reasonably good ones. Someday, to me, I loved, it was creative, et cetera. It was also a short film. So it's always a little hard to compare those to something else.
Yeah, and it also combined a few things where conflicting feelings of, on one hand, the idea that I talked about before about sort of sticking to their guns a la Christopher Nolan in one way, but in the other way, the diversification of the Apple marketing is through the platform of who they are, whether that's Apple TV Plus as a brand, like that premium feeling, or Apple Music to a certain extent. But like here you have, right, like Pedro Pascal and directed by Spike Jonze. It's like, that's like one of their other shows that they're, one of their many shows they're announcing. It's like, this is how we feel about sort of the arts and the idea of a premium brand. And that in itself continues to, I guess, float the brand in a way.
Yeah, I mean, premium content for a premium brand, it's interesting. I actually had not thought about it in conversation with obviously their incredible content empire with, Apple TV Plus, which is certainly making some of my favorite shows these days. But it feels in conversation with their larger point of view on creativity and culture. And I know that you can do that with things that aren't a short film that's designed for entertainment, because they have, in the course of their history, even if they're apples, oranges, and roller skates, to be fair.
Yeah.
But that still very much felt like it was keeping them in the zone of the ultimate champions of like the human capacity for creativity and what that means for our experience. So of the things this year, that to me, obviously, would probably be the strongest.
Okay, that's the strongest. We can't talk about 2024 without addressing Crush, which was like maybe one of their most, I mean, speaking of pantheons, talked about or disliked ad in which a collection of artistic materials from pianos to paints to sculpture to everything was crushed by an industrial compactor into what becomes an iPad to demonstrate the power of the new iPad, and people freaked out based on not just the ad, but the cultural conversation and environment around AI, around all kinds of different things having to do with the creative class.
Yeah.
That was, and they admitted, was a bit of a misstep. Beautiful, but I mean, just the message seemed to be completely off.
Yeah, I feel bad for them on that one. Like, it's interesting. It was certainly the most talked about Apple campaign in recent years.
Yeah.
Because it was so heavily debated. And I am absolutely positive that nobody thought, when they were thinking about this idea of like taking all of this human creativity and mashing it, for lack of a better word, into like the world's thinnest device. I think the unintended context of AI clearly was like the quiet part of the internet.
For sure.
Felt out loud and said out loud. I wasn't personally as bothered by that one as others seem to be, because clearly that was not their intent. If anything, I think it was a victim of bad timing. But to me, I think it felt a little bit less like Apple made a terrible gaffe or a mistake, and more like the release just ended up being this well-timed canvas that people could like project their fears about AI onto. And like their response to that was to like apologize and, say we made a misstep. I feel like there's maybe been a concerted effort to scrub it off the internet. Because when I was trying to go back and rewatch it, like all the videos were like, this link is not available.
Yeah.
Which I get from a crisis comms perspective. They wanted to move past it. But part of me wonders of like, rather than disavowing it, I almost wish they just like re-released it in reverse, where it started flat. It expanded to encompass all the creativity in that small package and then lead a conversation on the role of tech to unleash and enable creativity. Because I think on one hand, I get the literal metaphor. Like you are this company that has been all about equipping humans to create things. And in this image, at this time, where people are very afraid of AI replacing human creativity, this now feels like you're squashing it. I don't think that was their intent. But I think if any brand in the world had the permission to challenge that and be like, no, let's have a conversation about technology as a tool and these are new tools, I think Apple had the credibility to do that. And if they had like done their like recut that expanded and then convened a conversation, I think it would have worked. Like Monday morning quarterback, but I think it would have worked.
I agree. And I agree with your point about the reputation. I think that, it was a bit culturally tone deaf because even if, and I wasn't personally offended by it either, but I could see the potential for that just based on the conversations that were happening around it. And the fact that some of Apple's biggest fans and customers were maybe some of the more vocal in that overall conversation. But yeah, you're right. Like, why not in this day and age, like the idea of agile shifting, whether that's an apology or I was just thinking about this last week where the kind of absurdity of HBO Max going to Max and back to HBO Max. And like, and then all HBO Max's socials were like using HBO IP to make fun of the whole thing was like bang on. Like they have creative clout and certainly a lot of goodwill. It's just funny acknowledging what's going on and doing it in a creative way. Apple definitely could have. And I think they may even talked about the idea of it in reverse would have maybe been better. And that's like, okay, well, just do it. Show the reverse cut.
I wanted them to like recut it, release it, and then use that as a catalyst for conversation.
Totally.
I think they could have. Now, one could argue that the fact that the conversation died down and then we all freaked out about, somebody else's bad day and then they made more
right.
I'm sure their comms people right now are like, we did the perfect thing because it was a squall and not a full hurricane.
Why are you guys talking about it now? Shut up.
Thank you.
So 2024, I'm getting the sense, great work, some questionable choices, but overall pretty much consistent with their very impressive output over a long period of time. You mentioned that when you think about this year, you're thinking about it in the context of your pantheon, your top 5 Apple ads. So I want to get into that. Where does this year's honor fit, or how does it look through the lens of the brand's sort of historical breakthrough or best work? And okay, so we're going to count down. I don't know. You want to go from 5 to 1? And then if we have any in common, we can sort of
that
slip
works.
them in.
Let me say one thing before we get into the list itself.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned Christopher Nolan. So to borrow another like director metaphor, I kept thinking about Scorsese winning the Oscar for The Departed. Right, and then the debate around that, where they're like, was it really about The Departed? Or was this like he's done all these things and he should have won for X, but we're going to give it to him for Y? I'm not saying that's what's happening here. But I couldn't help but think of the metaphor. Because again, on one hand, like they had some incredible work. Like Someday was amazing. Again, like Heartstrings, we could have a debate as to whether or not AT&T could have made that ad or Kia could have made that, or like if it's not a genre of its own. But like it was solid. It was beautiful. I think I already said, I think the Apple Intelligent work maybe had like a dim view of humanity. But Fuzzy Feelings won an Emmy. So like it's hard to argue they had a good year.
Right.
I definitely think, it was a solid year for them with some high points. So like I get it, but it was also fun to go back and just think about the fact that like so few brands have made so many culturally significant campaigns over time. They've done that by balancing form and function so elegantly for so long. And so going back and being like, okay, well, what were the top? It was an interesting exercise for me, even just to see kind of how spread out they were. Like in my mind, sometimes I think they were like right on top of each other because your memory crowds things. But actually, yeah, there were high water marks that kind of dotted the last 20 years.
For sure. I love that about The Departed because I was thinking of Training Day in Denzel Washington. I was like, is this the training day year for this? But yes, The Departed is this the Departed training day year for Apple? Who knows? Both great movies. I like both those movies. So,
It's an amazing movie.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not like,
Exactly.
no one's like ragging on The Departed, but yeah, there's some cumulative
It's not the
impact.
Irishman of Apple's years. Let's start this countdown on your side with your number 5.
This is actually probably helpful too, because it's the one you have to put on the list. For me, my number 5 was 1984.
All right. Yeah.
I was in diapers when it came out. So I might have a different point of view if I had been like of age and I had like a current cultural memory of what that did. Like I see that more historically. It's not actually my favorite, but it's inarguably one of the most important ads ever made. If they weren't already on the map for the counterculture, I think they were in computing. I feel like it put them in the map and the counterculture for advertising. And even just the fact that like every few years, even now, the focus group recirculates on YouTube, where there was a focus group years later of 1984, and they're like, put a golden retriever in it. What if they were in Apple Store uniforms or big logos?
Yeah.
It so stands in contrast to the overly focus grouped, overwrought, overthought work that plagues so much of the industry today. And the fact that people are still talking about it decades later and it has a permanent spot in pop culture, to me, regardless of whether or not it's my personal favorite, it is, the advertising embodiment of Henry Ford's. If you ask people what they wanted, they would have requested a faster horse. Nobody would have thought to have asked for this. And yet, it changed advertising. So it's got to be on the list. It's my number 5.
That's a good choice. I was definitely potty trained, but I wasn't old enough to appreciate a ad for personal computing. I do think maybe my view of this one is skewed in a historical sense, like you said. Like it's like, oh, it aired once, it changed advertising. It's the ethos that, like to your point about focus grouping, that it embodies is sort of iconic in a way for the brand. So for my number 5, I'm kind of going more like, okay, obviously work like 1984 set the foundations for a lot of this, but I kind of just decided to pick a lane of my favorites, sort of in a historical sense, not trying to like, hey, you're definitely going to disagree. But I did pick, because I watch advertising a lot of it, like you, of course. And this has stuck out every holiday since it aired. I'm like, is anything better than that one? I don't know. And I like Misunderstood from 2013, where the teenage boy is like on his phone the whole time as the family is going to visit the grandparents for Christmas. And it looks like it's just a typical teenager with his phone. And at the end, he reveals the whole time he's been shooting a sweet home movie of the family. It's cheesy, but I felt like at the time, it's like, oh my gosh, you really just like told a really nice little story about your product demo, about what it could do for the holiday, which, arguably much like Super Bowl is like one of the bigger bets of any brand when they're rolling things out. So as in terms of pure enjoyment and where it fits in like every holiday, I'm like, it's kind of it become a standard bearer for what I judge other holiday ads against in some ways. I named that for my number 5.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. I hadn't really thought about the fact that, like, obviously Christmas ads are their own genre. I mean, obviously, like John Lewis, the
Brits are the whole other thing.
Yeah, the rabbi and the imam, or the old ladies on the sled. So, like, yeah, if there's ever a time of year where you have permission to be unapologetically sentimental, I won't say schmaltzy, holiday is when you can do it. It is interesting to think about the fact that this is 2013. So this is like more than a decade before the anxious generation, when everybody is like, these kids on devices are a problem.
Oh, yeah.
They're definitely like ahead of their time. That's really interesting. And again, like, I don't dislike it. I remember seeing it. It's sweet, as now a parent of a teenagers, plural. I definitely get it. It was lovely going back and rewatching it. But again, I go back to like Apple at its best in my mind is so singular. And so I'm like, could someone else have done it? But I'd not thought about your point Yeah, but has anybody done it better? I think is a really great question. So I see why you got it on the list.
So Christmas 25, that Sweet Home movie would actually just be like a 15-second reel of the
Yeah.
family.
I mean, maybe. Fair.
Probably, or
Yeah.
TikTok. Okay, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is the most recent on the list, and it is The Greatest, 2022.
Oh, yeah.
I did think it was interesting. This was the only one for me that was in the past 5 years that made the Pantheon. And again, not because there hasn't been good work, but something good enough to dislodge, some of the things that have made a huge impression on me over time. I remember just like the profound jealousy I felt when I watched that film the first time, like the best kind of jealousy, like the kind of jealousy that makes me want to like run harder and create braver, more beautiful things. I think all of the best of Apple's work, it is technology in service of humanity. It makes you rethink what's possible in this really beautiful way. I had never seen anything like it. There's so many little stylistic choices from the song to the shooting angles that to me, there was a through line that put it in the top of the top. It was utterly unlike anything else I had ever seen. So I love The Greatest. That's my number 4.
Well, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. It's not on my list, but that's a good one. Again, I feel like to say, it feels weird to say, oh, well, something in your top 5 is not on my list, but I feel like
No, it's
the
fine.
choice, no, but to me, what it makes me think is like, there is a lot to choose from depending on what you gravitate towards, right? Like, and what kind of, I guess, angle on like, are you going historical? Are you going personal gut feeling? Are you going, that's a really great choice. I agree with everything you said. I think it's a great ad that sort of, to your point of like, could anyone else do this? I'm not sure.
Well, actually, it'll be interesting to see your whole list as we go through this exercise, because the through line for mine was when I look back on it, it was like this ad changed things. Like this ad was a pivot point for how business worked or how marketing worked or how consumers saw a category or how consumers saw themselves. So again, like what an incredibly high bar. But I think that was my through line. I'm excited to see kind of the theme in yours as we go through.
Oh gosh, mine might just be chaotic, beyond not as logical. My number 4 is from 2019, and it's Underdogs, because I really liked this, especially again, I think I framed their work earlier as not quite experimental, but this was definitely sort of tech ad as sort of sitcom, but it actually worked like through the casting and the tone and the pace. So it's basically a group of coworkers that kind of get together to they decide to quit and start a business and create a product. And they're all using obviously Apple products, but it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for some of the brand's past iconic advertising. But I do think that the level of difficulty, the number of products sort of seamlessly highlighted in the storytelling and the overall entertainment value, and how the brand, I mean, and I'm viewing this, it's skewed. I'm not seeing it in a vacuum, but they subsequently extended it into some pretty impressive subsequent sequels, to me made it innovative and, if not singular, certainly like the high level of difficulty.
I love that. 2019 was a good year for them. This did not make my top 5, but it was on my honorable mention list, was the HomePod ad they did with FKA Twigs.
Oh, yeah.
In 2019, which was another Spike Jonze. It's a little bit of a cheat that I'm mixing it in. I do think, sadly, the ad might have been better than the product, given that I don't know anybody with a HomePod. No offense, guys.
That's true.
That one obviously starts in this like very mundane, like a subway commute. It shows this woman's home like expand and transform because of the feeling of music. And that had that kind of through line of like the product is transformative as a campaign. So that wasn't in my top 5, but 2019 I think was a really good year for them too.
Nice. Okay. Number 3.
All right. Number 3 for me was Get a Mac, better known as Mac versus PC. This one ran 2006 through 2009.
I had them at my number 2.
Oh, yay. Okay, cool. Then we'll talk about them together. I mean, that one, in some ways was so much more like didactic, like they were saying the quiet part out loud. One could argue in retrospect that it was more salesy, in terms of like this versus that and feature function, which might make it surprising. But it's on my list because it marks when Apple felt like the most key to people's identity. And obviously, marketing is bigger than advertising. So there's a little chicken and the egg, but I think it captured and codified this moment where there was this level of irrational loyalty and identification that Mac fans felt. Like, I almost wanted to include Christopher Guest, the scene in Best in Show, in their pantheon, where Parker Posey and Michael Hitchcock are talking about meeting at different Starbucks, and they were both on their Macs. But it was a reflection of like that moment in culture. Hi, I'm Mac. Hi, I'm EC. I'm PC. Because it seems so weird before then and maybe after that a computer company would be so part of culture that it would be someone's like entire personality and nobody would think that was weird. Plus just so much shade. Like, you should see this guy with spreadsheets. It's insane. That one makes my top 3. Why was it your number 2? I know we're going to skip around for a minute, but let's talk about it.
For all the same reasons. I think our 2 and 3s are flopped, by the way, that are the same or just switched. But I really thought how it answers the question kind of like, how would Apple do the Pepsi challenge? And neither Coke nor Pepsi had the same, to your point about like cultural identity tied into its brand, however weird that is. But that they were able to tap into this. Maybe before this, it was more underlying, like, in a corporation, you'd have the accounting department and then the creative department or the market advertising folks were on Macs, or, there's always that kind of dynamic in some ways, or, and arguments among friends around these things. But like, it really articulated it in a really funny, the casting was flawless.
Yeah.
The jokes were good. Hodgman was unbelievable. Not only was the whole setup and the concept cool and unique, but the execution, even on the most micro level, was perfect. And then you add into that the consistency. What are we talking here? We're talking about
66 ads.
66 ads over 3 years.
I didn't even realize at the time.
How does that make you feel as someone who works on ads, seeing that 66 ads in 3 years? Is that a lot? Sounds like a lot.
Yes, it's definitely a lot. By today's standards and by 2006, 2009 standards. Yeah, but it's so interesting. Like, think about if almost any other marketer had done that. It's a white psych, 2 guys talking about one product, it being better than the other in features and functions, 22 ads a year if you spread them out, evenly across the 4. If that was not so entertaining, so funny, so well done, it would have been hated. And the fact that like people didn't fatigue, the fact that people enjoyed it just goes to show that like the writing was great, the acting was great. It didn't feel like, oh God, here we go again with another one of these. Like, it was consistently entertaining in a way that, like, again, it's a finesse thing. So few marketers would have had the discipline to do that in a way that didn't make it obnoxious really fast, which is one of the reasons why it made my list. It was like really good for a really long time when it like almost shouldn't have been. I think it made it look deceptively simple, but I think if we're being really honest, I don't know who else could have pulled it off.
Yeah, it's like a funny ad disguised as a speeds and feeds ad almost. Like, it's like you'd think the look of it seems like, oh God, this is going to be a hard sell, like compare.
And yet they pulled it off. It's funny, like as in advertising, as with dating, the difference between charming and alarming is whether or not you like the person at your window. Like, I always think about that, like with Say Anything, where he's like there with the boombox, and it's like,
it could be a totally different vibe.
Yeah, charming or alarming depends on like whether or not you think that boy's cute. But in this case, like, charming or alarming or like great or grating, to get super punny, like depends on whether or not they pulled it off. And they pulled it off, which why for me, it was my number 3. All right, how about you? You said we flipped our 2 and 3. Why don't you go first this time?
Yes. So, okay, my number 3, which I believe is your number 2, is Silhouettes from 2003. I think that, so this was the iPod launch campaign, I believe. Yeah, if not close to it, where, was it a Jet song that was the video ad version of it? I remember the posters too. All of it.
I can't remember which came out first. I feel like there was like either a Strokes or a White Stripes song. So there was that one, but then you also had like the Bono one.
Yes.
So there was a few of them in that same campaign. And to me, it's much more the campaign I kind of use the first spot as the proxy because again, it was like, I've never seen anything like this
No, yeah, it
before.
set the standard.
It's the body of work kind of, yeah.
Absolutely. So I like this because it was new product,
Yeah.
made it exciting. I mean, the product is exciting anyway when something is summed up in such a perfect way of 100 songs in your pocket. Is just like, but the way it articulated it is fun, colorful. They made it instantly iconic with the silhouettes of the white earbuds with the wire this time down to the iPod, like, and using good tunes, which Apple became very well known for post that. I think of as a Canadian Feist's 1, 2, 3. That was a huge one. And it's like every song that they used became a number one hit like immediately. But the visually
on Apple iTunes, like working the ecosystem.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only misstep, speaking of like, we were talking about Crush this year, and you mentioned Bono and Project Red. Was it an iPod or am I mixing up eras? But what was the one where they had the U2 album already installed and people were like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I think it was that one.
Anyway, people did not like that choice being made for them. But beyond that, the campaign was, again, I think it's as simple as they made the product instantly iconic with just visually and sonically, and it really articulated the impact of that product on culture in a fantastic way.
It really is. I mean, I know I said it earlier, but obviously like marketing is it's product, it's design, it's the proposition, it's all the pieces and the advertising. And this was a moment of all of those things just working together. Like it was a product unlike almost anything else and a product with tremendous restraint. I use that, this is an example actually pretty often. If I'm ever talking to a marketer who's like, yeah, but we got there first.
Mm-hmm.
And they want kind of a backwards looking, I'm not saying that can never work, but like there can be this natural thing that's like, well, but we got there first and this other thing's more famous. And it's like, right, there was a Zune before there was an iPod and nobody's like RIP Zune. And it's not because there wasn't an ad that was like, we did it first, you know?
Yeah.
In many instances, Apple was the second mover to a category. Like they would take an established category that was still like a little bit niche and the UX wasn't great, the design wasn't great. So obviously there was like a Treo and a BlackBerry before there was an iPhone. There was a Zune before there was an iPod. But the radical simplicity of like stripping it back, famously the Zune, I never had one, like had all these features and functions. And again, I think it was a little overwrought. And there was an understanding of an iconicity that meant actually stripping things back.
Yeah.
And that was true in the product. It was beautifully articulated in 100 songs in your pocket, not you can do this and you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. It was like really boiling down and making the main thing that felt reflected in the simplicity and how stripped back silhouettes were. And so again, to me, it was like all those things working together and talking about like an ad. We could have a conversation about the chicken or the egg, like feeling so of a moment in culture. It was like Bono and Project Red. I loved Bono and U2, so I was not bothered by the free song. We were buying all of our music then. We weren't renting it. But it was an ad that looked and felt like nothing else for a product that looked and felt like nothing else. And that felt like a revolution. It was arresting. And that to me is why it's my number 2.
Nice. Okay. This is the one. The top one. Number one. What's your number 1?
I feel so basic, but so think different. 1997, 0 listeners are surprised. I said a little bit of it earlier, but like Apple literally kicked off a generation of purpose-driven marketing with this ad, probably without even meaning to. Again, Simon Sinek's viral Start With Why video was trying to explain to people why the Apple stuff works like it did. And then that was just like copied and pasted, by a generation of marketers. And so, for a company that's famously product forward, they never showed a computer. It really was just talking about planting a missional flag for the company. And I think it kicked off that era of identity-based brand marketing in one fell swoop. Without Think Different, I don't think you get I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, because people hadn't seen something where they could identify from a values perspective with the company in quite that way. And so I think when they planted that flag in the way that they did, and again, people had never seen anything like it, and like, good God, think about hubris, like putting yourself up there with like Einstein and Gandhi and being like, this is me. In retrospect, that part maybe didn't age well.
Right.
I think it was doing something that, again, like changed the way marketing works, changed the way people interacted with brands. And I remember seeing it and I remember all the feels. And frankly, if we watch it today, we still feel that way. So it's my number one.
It's really good. It's really good. I love that. And again, I'm going to go with this is my excuse / reasoning for my list, in the sense that I kind of created the list with the knowledge of all this past work. Like, I'm fully aware that what I picked would not exist without, but I think it falls into the same category. So mine, just because things like 1984 and Think Different are those foundations, but I've just been thinking about the role of the iPhone and how it's impacted culture and society and more, and how it still makes up, I think, 50% of sales, of all Apple sales right now. And I remember when it aired, I remember being like, whoa, that is a flex, a real flex. It was, so from 2007, I think it aired during the Oscars, called Hello. And it was basically clips of movies, like, whether, it's there's Will Ferrell, Dustin Hoffman, Marilyn Monroe answering the phone, hello, hello, hello. And then it ends with the iPhone being like, oh, this is changing what you think a phone is. And I just thought it sort of encapsulated the stature of the product, how important they thought it was going to be, the way they integrated pop culture into it. And then the moment during the Oscars was just like the creative, the product. It's one of my favorites. I'm a sucker for this stuff. I totally fell for McDonald's inspo as featured in from 2023, which they sort of did a massive supercut of every time the golden arches were in a movie or TV. And Apple themselves tried to copy it. I mean, kind of like your HomePod reference, tried to copy it for the Vision Pro when it was showing all kinds of movies and TV where folks were putting on goggles. So Hello to me was both, as it was happening, you're like, what is this? This is cool. It's like, what? And then you find out what it's for. And then now, obviously in hindsight, knowing what it kicked off, and maybe that's a skewed view, but that's my number one.
I remember that one too. It's really beautifully done. It is, in retrospect, looking back at my list, some of the most iconic work was happening at times when products were shifting culture. Like, if I was on the Apple team, there would be part of me today that was like, yeah, but you were launching the iPod, you were launching the iPhone. Like,
right.
I'm certainly not saying the product marketed itself, but like, it does feel like Apex Mountain for Apple releasing products that were changing culture. Now most of the innovation is happening on features within it or I mean, like, the greatest is an example of, like, it's not a new product, it's a new application of the product.
Nice. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it there. That was awesome. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm nothing if not opinionated, so I can always be counted on.
Now it's time for the CMO Sit Down, where I talk to senior marketing leaders about a project or piece of work that we love. This month, I'm excited to chat with Meta's head of global consumer marketing, Ishan Panadurai, to talk about The Seat, a feature documentary from WhatsApp that dropped on Netflix last month about Mercedes Formula One's team's search for a successor for racing legend Lewis Hamilton. Esh worked on major brands from Ford and P&G to Uber, YouTube, and Google. Before taking on the overall global role at Meta, he led marketing for WhatsApp. Let's jump into it. Perhaps the most critical element to this story itself is how the Mercedes team used WhatsApp as its primary communication platform throughout that whole process, and granted access to a lot of those private conversations for the film. I mean, from a brand perspective, Ash, this is like, I feel like this is a marketer's dream come true. So I wanted to start broadly and just ask how this project came about.
First, thanks for watching. We're very proud of it. Our relationship with Mercedes is now 2 years deep, and it's a long-term partnership, and it's a true partnership where probably June last year, they sort of let us know privately, like, hey, this is who we're thinking about in terms of being the next driver. And one of the reasons that we forged this partnership was that they truly use WhatsApp in the way that we see WhatsApp as a company. It is for all their private communication. That whole team runs on WhatsApp. And we realized that this next big decision, maybe one of the biggest decisions in sport, there's only 20 drivers in the world, was happening on WhatsApp. And we're like, look, we want to tell this story. This is true to our brand. This is true to our product, which is about connecting people privately. You're doing it probably with the ultimate use case of like selecting the next big driver in F1. And we just started documenting it. We're like, look, let us be part of this process with you. Everything you're doing, everything you're talking about is an artifact, essentially. And it is an artifact that we can use to tell a really powerful story about how you made this decision and his journey into becoming this person. So that's really how it started. And you now see the end product, which is now on Netflix as, you know, our first sort of feature documentary on Netflix. But that's how it started. A function of a long-term partnership with Mercedes and just ongoing conversations about how we could get deeper in their story.
What was the process like? I understand, obviously, there's the pre-existing partnership. What was that process like as the project was happening? I mean, how do you balance the needs of each brand while also, I mean, this is maybe the ultimate brand entertainment or entertainment question for any brand, but how do you balance the needs of each brand while also making something worthwhile for viewers?
It's a good story. I mean, look, we've had history here over the last few years of how to, and I think we've got better as we go. We launched a documentary called We Are Yanda, which is a true story about the Afghani women's football team and how they escaped Afghanistan when the Taliban took over using WhatsApp. We then told the story of Janis and how him being Greek, being Nigerian, playing ball in the US, and how WhatsApp is his connection point to his heritage and his family. And they're all documentaries too. And I think we'd got some runs on the board of like, okay, how do you be true to the story, but also be true to your product? And I think here the primary thing was the thing that people are going to be interested in is like, how did you get to this driver? Why him? What's his story? That's the hook. And like, that's what people are tuning in for. And then organically, how did WhatsApp play a role here? So I think the balance is always what is the story and what are people interested in? And then where's that product naturally fit in versus the danger sometimes can be the inverse, right? Of like, we want to sell you something. Where's the story? It's very much story first. And that's the genesis of our whole partnership with Mercedes in the sense that we didn't look for logo placements when we formed this partnership. Right. We were like, where can we contextually show up in your operations as a team with the race? Where do we show up in the most contextual places? That's why we have a radio button. Like our only logo on the car is the tiniest little logo, which is the radio button on the driving wheel, because that contextually makes sense in terms of what WhatsApp does. Or if they cut to Toto, you see it on his microphone. So it's an extension of that, of like the story we want to tell is the most important thing. Our brand will fit in naturally. So that's kind of where we started.
I love that about it feels like just the self-aware restraint from a brand perspective, both from the logo to where you show up, because even if all the chips fall in where they're using WhatsApp organically, that's part of the story. The film is done in a way.
Yeah.
And then negotiation starts of how, where you are in the credits, how big, or where the logos show up in certain interviews. There's ways that are almost like someone in your position could ruin it in a way. Like not ruin it, but like certainly overbrand it.
Yeah.
How do you sort of gauge or navigate that tension between, obviously WhatsApp's a part of it and you want to be a part of it, but gauging the appetite or the tolerance from the audience perspective for the brand presence?
A lot of this is intuition and just knowing your brand really well, right? And I think we, over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, I joined the company 6 years ago and we stood up a marketing team for the first time. I think we have really good intuition of how WhatsApp shows up in culture generally, right? And so if you think about it, multi-billions of people use WhatsApp every day. And we're really clear on the role we play in culture, right? And for us, I think what we've realized is it's like as people have moved away from public spaces to have conversations to more intimate spaces in conversation, the behind the scenes of things that make culture happen on WhatsApp. Everything from how does a football transfer happen? It's probably happening on WhatsApp, or a free agent signing, or hey, someone's making music. They're probably trading sort of different sound files on WhatsApp. I spoke to the people at Nike years ago, and a lot of their shoe design is done on WhatsApp in trading design files and things like that. So like we've learned where we have permission to tell stories like this and the role we play.
Yeah.
And so when it came to this, there's a lot of intuition, to be honest. So we know where it feels like a sell versus this is a natural part of the story. But the ultimate principle is like, what's the best story here?
Yeah.
What is the most engaging story? And then where do we weave in naturally? The answer really here is intuition and just like reps, I think, to some extent.
Nice. Well, I look forward to seeing the Nike doc. Speaking of getting the reps in, one of the first pieces, so I joined Fast Company in late 2013. And one of the first things I wrote was about a film from Google India called Reunion. And I believe that you're behind this. And thinking of like for anyone listening, please just go Google that right now and watch it. It's essentially, and I'm going to get this right, but it's basically a film that, a man's granddaughter used Google to track down his childhood friend who he hadn't seen since the 1947 partition that tore the region into two separate countries, India and Pakistan. It's just a great story, well told. And the thing about it was, much like where you're talking about The Seat or We Are Allende or the Giannis film, the product and the platform played a key role. It wasn't, overly branded. It was just an authentic, I know that's an overly used word, use case. And it makes me think, it's one thing to sort of stumble upon these things, but it's another when I'm looking at your work where the products or the platforms play these roles that you have a pretty good intuition of not only how much a brand should show up, but how to find ways the product is being used in culture and finding the stories there. What's the balance? And now going back to the getting your reps in, what is the balance between serendipity and strategy when it comes to finding these stories? Because I know I'm sure there's a lot of people working with brands or agencies or whatever listening that would say like, oh, that's great. But like, how do you even find these stories? You're a primary authority to talk about this.
It's humbling that you've tracked me on Google Reunion. That was many moons ago. So I'm glad that. But as you say, that was a story about two friends reuniting that was separated during the partition of two countries. And you talked about the product, like the product's sort of the backbone of telling that story the right way.
Yeah.
And to the point where there's a store that we use on Google Maps there. It's a sweet store in Pakistan. We went out to Pakistan to make sure that store was actually on Google Maps versus doctoring it, for example.
Nice.
Authentic is a real big thing in all of this. But I think to your question on is it serendipity or strategy, it's definitely strategy. I think the danger here is people fall in love with what they want to do versus the story they want to tell, right? So you can wake up in the morning and you could be like, I want an original documentary. I don't think we've ever woken up and said that as a team, nor have I said it in my career. It was really about being clear of like, hey, what are we trying to achieve as a brand? What are we trying to achieve as a business, right? And today on WhatsApp, we are ubiquitous in parts of the world. We're growing in the US. We can advertise our way through, and we certainly are doing that really well. But we understand how people use our product, and we understand the everyday usage of this product and what it means to people. So I think it comes back to like, strategy is best informed by understanding your consumer. And I think these things that you're referencing are a function of deep understanding of your consumer. There's a way to do that through advertising. There's a way to do that through storytelling. And I think what we're talking about today is how that understanding of your consumer translates to really powerful storytelling. And I think that's what it is. It's a deep understanding of your consumer, not falling in love with a vehicle or a concept that you just ideally want to make. And sometimes marketers, I'm guilty of this too, of like, there's a shiny thing over there. I'd like to make that thing versus just drawing back to like, okay, what do I understand about my consumer? And this whole thing with the Seat and Mercedes was, we knew it was a fast-growing sport. It was growing heavily in the US. We wanted to grow in the US. Our business goals were very aligned. And then all these things sort of fell out of that. So that's how so I guess it's strategy.
Definitely. That idea of the end goal in mind, and I know this also comes back to something I've heard you say, which you did credit to somebody else, but something about basically a great strategy starts with an end in mind, and the end not being the feature documentary, the end being how to connect with your consumer and how and what's the best way to do that, I imagine. So that sounds like the strategic side of being ready for the serendipity anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was from an early manager of mine who said, I couldn't get my head around strategy and what it really meant. And she's like, all it means is just beginning with the end in mind. So you said it well, Jeff.
Nice. What was and maybe this is more, I don't know, the sort of how the sausage gets made in terms of getting a doc on Netflix, but like people hear brands and Netflix and they think, they're new kind of ad tier and they're working with brands in a few different ways. But and I imagine they're pretty hungry for F1 content given the success of Drive to Survive and to your point around the growing US audience. What was the process from your perspective of this landing there?
Our partnership with Netflix has been, some multi-beats, right? So we've definitely used their ad tier, but, last year we had a partnership with them in Squid Games in the US. And so that was a building of the relationship between the two parties. And that led to this. But I think for us, it's very clear Netflix is a premier streaming platform. There's a perception of consumers that high quality content is on Netflix. And when we made this film, we were clear that there were certain platforms that would best serve this content being consumed in the right way, whether it's sports streaming, Netflix, and otherwise. So it was a sort of deliberate attempt to understand, like, okay, we've got a great piece of content, we've got the right story, but the medium is also important, right? Like we could have put this on YouTube and it probably doesn't get the same credibility, or it doesn't probably get the same interest.
Yeah.
But if you can be there on Netflix with their recommendations, you've watched Drive to Survive, you're probably interested in some more F1 content. That was sort of our thinking there. But we were definitely thinking about where's the right place for this to live. So to your point, you've got the strategy, you've got the story, you've got the right understanding of your product and consumer, then you've got to think about the channels. So no different than when you're doing an advertising campaign, you're thinking about the channels that are going to be most resonant with your advertising. Kind of approach the same way of like, okay, where's the right platform for this content to live and for it to be most resonant? So that was kind of the process in this.
Nice. I remember, I think I had a conversation, I'm not sure if it was with Vivian or who is marketing at WhatsApp specifically, but like I think it was We Are Allende, there was a specific reason that was on YouTube for the global audience, I believe. And that brings me to, thinking about that. Were there any specific lessons from past projects, whether WhatsApp or previously in your career, that were particularly helpful when it came to evaluating, the seed as a story and opportunity, where it might live, and how the brand would live within it? Yeah, just interested in, like, because you guys have had your reps, what were maybe some of the more specific lessons that came into play here?
Yeah, I think it's a number. You just hit it, like, to Vivian's point. Allende, we wanted it on YouTube, just given the nature of the story and the people we wanted to feel it and experience it. We wanted to make sure it was highly accessible, because that was an important story about not just culture, but the safety that this product can provide, and like the almost ultimate use case of private connection and what it enables.
Yeah.
Enable the escape of these young ladies outside the country. I think what we've learned is a couple of things. Like, we're learning the balance between sort of organic traffic versus paid traffic versus premium content, behind a paywall, outside a paywall. How does it all work? And we have different goals for all of this, right? So the seat was definitely in service of our partnership and growing in the US. We felt the eyeballs were there. This all ladders up to our broader strategy in the US, and this is a component of that. We're helping people understand the benefit of WhatsApp in the context of whether you're an Android user or an iPhone user, WhatsApp works seamlessly. It is a private messaging service that you can use regardless. Mercedes and this partnership is almost a cultural vehicle for us to augment and complement what we do in more traditional advertising. Netflix has high reach in the US. So that was kind of the thing. So a lot of this comes back to the business goal and not the isolated effort, but the total business goal of what we're trying to achieve. And that's like, there are some of the lessons we've learned as we've gone through this, and it's sort of how this has evolved.
Speaking of like the traditional marketing channels versus the kind of cultural play, I've talked to others who have invested in entertainment projects, and sometimes they talk about the entertainment project as something to market against, not just their, but like so was there ways that you guys were using this seat from a advertising or marketing perspective that was kind of hyping the seat, like as a brand or your place in it? Or was it just put the film out as is and sort of see how it lives out in the world?
Oh, no, definitely. This all comes back to our sort of business strategy and our goals around growing WhatsApp in this part of the world. So more than just putting it on a platform, hoping it does well, there's so many angles to this.
Sure.
We've thought, promoting this in the product, ensuring there's awareness for the content and people are driving towards the content. Social is a huge vehicle of this. And it's weird. Like, I think our partnership here on Mercedes is like now gone from original content to branding on a car to interesting, like, we literally did an activation at the Empire State Building last year with Lewis driving down the street.
Oh, yeah.
So even like branded vehicles now, the emoji car in the app is now a remote control car that races around a track. So it is all in service of a business goal and our business strategy, but it's finding life on its own. But for us to do something like this, we want the eyeballs, we want the attention, we want people to be drawn to it, because as much as they're going to be interested in the story, they're going to find out about WhatsApp too. So that's definitely part of the mix as we think about this.
Nice. I love that. And that was their F1 car down Fifth Avenue, I believe, wasn't it, last year?
That's right. It's the first time an F1 car's ever rode on the streets of New York. And we shut down Fifth Avenue right outside the Empire State Building, which is, pretty epic. And I think that speaks to that. I said we didn't wake up in the morning and say we want to do original content. We woke up in the morning and said, look, this is a valuable partnership to help our growth efforts in this part of the world. What are the number of ways we can bring this to life? And how do you look at it as a total package?
Nice. Beyond the partnership with Mercedes, and I mean, this could be even before, but I'm wondering how you have a project like this that comes to life in this way. It is now added to the reps side of things where you've created this thing. How is it influencing, impacting, or informing the way you're looking at other projects and other partnerships?
Yeah, I think the thing that we realize, the insight we have is like fandom lives in the group chat, so to speak, right? And if you like, you and I had a conversation about your team winning, and I'm sure you've got a group chat going with, other supporters, and whenever you support, whoever you support, or whatever sports you love, there's an element of fandom that really lives in the group chat, and we're seeing that. So that's informed a lot of our choices recently. We recently did a thing with LeBron James and the shop around the NFL draft where they're having a group chat and everyone can watch it or experience it inside WhatsApp, because it's kind of like the ultimate group chat. You kind of want to know what these athletes are talking about or watching other athletes. We'll be doing something soon with the Champions League final in a similar way. You'll see more there. You always talk Mercedes, but we just see a huge opportunity in sports around the fandom that exists in sports and how that lives in the group chat. And that's definitely an opportunity for us, almost like the ultimate group chat. And I think you see that in the seat as well, that the group chat's kind of the backbone of it all. This group chat between James, Toto, and Kimmy's dad, they're trying to figure this out together. So there's an insight there that we're trying to explore in many, many different ways.
The notion of the group chat, or the cultural significance of the group chat, is not getting any smaller. I imagine the story possibilities are endless.
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask, because you've not only obviously the seat, but your track record overall, I'm curious what your favorite piece of brand entertainment, or one that sticks out in your mind that you or a company you've worked for has not been involved in, that maybe it's on the jealousy meter, I don't know, but like basically are there any projects that you've looked at and been like, wow, that's impressive? Because I'm kind of obsessed with brand entertainment, because I think that brands are where business meets culture. And the entertainment side means that you're creating something that people actively want to check out and spend time with, more importantly. And that is, as simple it is to say, is incredibly rare. So to hear about the best examples and to hear about an example from you, someone who's created work that people want to spend time with, I'd love to hear what one or two of your favorites are.
Yeah, I feel like it's the question of like, is there work you wish you made or things you wish you could have, been a part of? And I think about it a lot. Look, the classic example that maybe gets said a lot, but I think is important, is like Red Bull. I think what Red Bull have done with Red Bull Media is really impressive. Like, they've not just done branded content, they've made it their business driver. Like, their whole business is now built on branded, essentially extreme sports and the media around extreme sports. They sell a drink and they somehow made a media company out of it.
Yeah.
A very successful one that's, many years in the game now. I think that's the ultimate one of like, hey, we have a drink. How do we bring this into culture? Or the culture of extreme sports is a real one. And they transform that not from just a cost center into like a profit generator for them. And I think that is probably the best example that exists in the world, where Red Bull Media they own football teams now and things like that. So that I think is the most impressive one. I also think how Netflix had transformed original content into brands is interesting, right? Like, they've got titles like Squid Games. The other day I was out, there's a Squid Game experience that my kid has been to like 5 times in the city, right? Like, you can play the games from Squid Game. So I think they've done that really well, of taking things you watch into like making that a brand for you and things like that. They're the big ones. Red Bull really is like the sort of pinnacle, I think, of a company that has made media their business, not just an avenue to grow their business. So I think is really interesting.
I think that like every marketer or brand at one point in the last 15 years has been like, how do we do a Red Bull? And what
Absolutely. I mean, everyone's like, I looked at YouTube when Felix Baumgartner jumped off.
Oh, okay.
And we live streamed on YouTube, so we were weirdly part of it. And I think for the next 5 years, everyone's like, how do we get our Felix Baumgartner moment? I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Like a guy jumping off from outer space into the ocean is a big deal. So you're right. Yeah, I feel like everyone references Red Bull in that.
Well, I think one of the lessons there or takeaways from just that idea of, whenever there's someone who kind of nails it for their brand, there's a reaction where people want to figure their own version of that out. And one thing that I like about what you guys have done at WhatsApp is you've kind of found your own way to do this and made really great content that just, again, going back to your earlier point, just doesn't smack of like, we want to do this content thing, so let's sort of crowbar our way into here and see if we can jam our brand down someone's throat this way. But like, it makes me think of, I heard an earlier interview where you were talking about, so you worked at, I don't know if you know it was Ford first, but P&G. When you got to P&G, you kind of had, visions of the cool big brands, and then they put you on Metamucil. And when I think of brand entertainment, sometimes it's like it's really interesting when I think there's a lot of brands that might think that it's out of their reach or out of their, and maybe it is, but I wonder if someone like you who has worked on a huge spectrum of brands in various ways, when we think about brand entertainment, what would be your advice to other marketers that are thinking about or have ambitions in that space?
Yeah, Metamucil stuff. Yeah, I'm glad you...
It's fiber, everybody. It's fiber.
I think it was one of those experiences where I really got to learn the power of marketing and reframing a product from, hey, this is just fiber. It's a health supplement. It's not what you think it is. Yeah. And like that can change. I think for me, the big thing here is forcing it. People will know when you're forcing it. And I think the principles of marketing, no matter what the medium is, are the same, right? Like, do you know who your user is? Do you know what motivates them? Do you have a deep insight about them and their connection to your product? And then you can that will inform your path forward. I think I'm guilty of this too at times. Like, I think marketers can fall in love with the medium or the vehicle before they do the work of who is my consumer? What do they love about us? Do I have a deep insight about them? We talked about Allende a little bit. Like, for us, we wanted it started with a sense of like, what are some real powerful, true stories about how WhatsApp is used in the world? That's where it started. And we found this story. It didn't start with, hey, we want to tell an original we want to make a documentary and we want it to be emotional and all these things. It was all those things. But it started with, how do we find some real world use cases of how WhatsApp's being used? And then it led to this. So I know it's almost cliched or like almost textbook to say, think about your consumer and have a deep insight about them. But that's where a lot of this is formed. Even the seat, there was an insight about how our products are used, but there was an insight of hey, what must it be like making a difficult decision in the world? And we all do that every day, whether it's, with your partner, your family, work, whatever it is. And there's a good chance a lot of that decision-making or that conversation is happening on WhatsApp. This is probably one of the most extreme decisions to make in the world with a lot of pressure involving, at the time, a 17-year-old. That's where and then we got to this versus we didn't want to tell a generic story about Kimi being a driver because everyone would know that story by the time we got there. Everyone knew he was driving Mercedes, but no one knew the thought, the thinking, the tensions. Those are things that often go unsaid. And that is something you use WhatsApp for, even just as normal people like you and me. So that's how we get there.
Well, it's a fantastic piece of work. Both, just as a doc, the fact that you guys as a brand were involved, intimately involved as the story is even more impressive. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat about it here, Ash.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. And, thank you for all the interest, man.
That's all for today's episode. Brand New World is part of the Fast Company Podcast Network. Our producers are Hawa Atori and Avery Miles. Editing by Blake Odom. Mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres. Our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Be sure to subscribe to Brand New World on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. You can also hear all episodes in the Most Innovative Companies podcast feed. If you like this podcast, leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, or let us know in the comments of Fast Company's social media. We're basically on every app you can think of. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.